On behalf of the Paleontological Society of India, I welcome all the fellows, members, and well-wishers from Lucknow and all over the India who are joining this particular function of Essensing Memorial Lecture, which we are organizing today on a virtual mode. We will be having, we are looking for that our president may join, but if he is unable to join, then I think our vice president will take over his role. And I especially welcome Dr. S.K. Vadhavan, former Director General of Geological Survey of India, who is going to speak or deliver his lecture, 23rd Professor Essence Singh Memorial Lecture, which is a very coveted lecture of Paleontological Society of India. So now I will hand over the stage or mic or whatever you say to Dr. Sudhir Shukla to
Thank,
please welcome
yeah.
our members, fellows from all over India.
Thank you, Dr. Mukund. And, good afternoon to everybody. I am Sudhir Shukla, now ex-ONGC from ONGC and now settled at Lucknow. As he has already told that I am Vice President of the Society currently. And since Professor MP Singh is unable to join on his behalf, I'll be welcoming all of you. So, as we all know that today we have I gathered here to in the Professor Essence Singh Memorial Lecture is the 23rd in the series, and the topic is very apt: the geoheritage sites and the potential geoparks in India, their implications for geotourism and geoconservation. The talk will be delivered by none other than very distinguished Dr. S.K. Vadhavan, ex-DG GSI. And first of all, I think I welcome him for this talk and his time, and he has been very kind to deliver this talk. So, Dr. Vadhavan, as we know, he is ex-DG from GSI, and he will be delivering this talk, which is very interesting for many of our colleagues and many people who are present here. And after that, I think I should welcome all my seniors. I see a couple of all my gurus, teachers, colleagues, and of course the fellow students and researchers, professors from different universities, scientists and researchers from different organizations, and all dignitaries who are, I'm especially not naming individually, but please accept my welcome on behalf of the Paleontological Society of India from here at Lucknow. I also welcome all the fellows, all the office bearers, regional chapters of the PSI, all dignitaries, professors, students, and other researchers who have been keenly interested in this subject and who have really come to listen to Dr. Vadhavan today. So I now, on behalf of the PSI and on behalf of the Professor MP Singh and the Society, I invite Dr. Vadhavan to kindly proceed and deliver his talk for the benefit of us. We will be much enlightened to know about the subject which he is going to share with us. Thank you very much.
Let us know about the Professor Essence Singh, because this lecture is in his memory and it is time to rejoice his accomplishments and his acts. So, anyway, I will give a brief description about Professor Essence Singh,
Yes.
whom all the paleontologists or micropaleontologists in India used to call him as a Suresh. He was born on April 10, 1927. And he proved to be true his family's academic traditions and had shown a keen sense of devotion in his. He received science faculty gold medals for his BSc honors and MSc degree in 1947 and 1948. He began his career as a teacher in the geology department of Lucknow University in July 1948, but soon thereafter joined Geological Survey of India in September 1948. A year later, he came back to Lucknow University upon personal persuasion of Acharya Narendra Dev, the then Vice Chancellor of the Lucknow University. He also went to Cornell University, Dhaka, New York, for higher studies on Government of India scholarships in February 1955. From 1957 to 1960, he served on deputation the Oil and Natural Gas Commission, a Government of India undertaking, as head of the paleontology section of the Central Laboratories. In this assignment, he began from scratch and founded the paleontology laboratories, which later blossomed into a self-contained center of research. In June 1960, he rejoined University of Lucknow and served there till his last. In 1970, he attended the second paleontological conference at Rome and toured various universities in Europe. He also lectured on many occasions in various national seminars and several universities in the country. In 1972, he convened and organized the second colloquium on Indian micropaleontology and stratigraphy, which has now blossomed in the full conference to which all the micropaleontologists look uh, with sense of pride. And every year, and next year, it is going to be organized in the Pune University. But we all lost him on 17 September 1980. That was a great loss for all the paleontologists of the country. And in his memory, the Paleontological Society of India started a lecture, Professor S.N. Singh Memorial Lecture, which was started in 1995. And since then, 23 lectures have been already delivered by dignitaries of the country. Today's lecture is being delivered by, as mentioned, Dr. S.K. Vadhavan. And it will be my pleasant duty to introduce Dr. Vadhavan as well. Dr. Sudesh Kumar Vadhavan, former Director General, Geological Survey of India, has been an alumnus of University of Delhi. Obtained his BSc Honours Geology in 1973 and MSc Applied Geology degree in 1976, and later completed his PhD on the Desert Geology in 1996 from the University of Rajasthan, Jaipur. Presently, he is associated as adjunct professor with Amrita Vishwa Vidyapeetham, Kerala, writing research articles, book, visiting faculty, and pursuing research interests in geoscience for sustainable development, minerals and mining sector, geohazards, promotion and protection of geoheritage sites, development of geoparks in India with the active support of INTAC and other NGOs. He joined GSI as a geologist in 1977 at the erstwhile Assam Meghalaya Circle in northeastern region, Shillong. He has served GSI in the various capacities with exceptional merit and devotion and commitment and in the different terrain conditions, and rose to the position of DG GSI. He has vast experience in applied geological and geochemical mapping, non-metallic, metallic mineral investigations, geotechnical and geoenvironmental and seismotectonic research, sedimentological analysis, stratigraphic correlations, paleoclimatic interpretations, and luminescence dating of quaternary sediments of desert, dry land, and coastal sedimentary environments. And he has published more than 55 research papers in peer-reviewed journals. He was a member and convener and co-convener of National Working Groups for IGCP projects, UNESCO International Geoscience Correlation Program projects. He has organized and coordinated several field workshops and compiled proceedings on the geoscientific projects and participated in international conferences and symposia in UAE, South Africa, China, USA, Canada, etc. As a Director General GSI, he has modernized the laboratories into Center of Excellence, galvanized and guided the geoscientists of GSI to launch high-quality national geoscientific program, such as National Program on Landslide Susceptibility Mapping on 1:50,000 scale on GIS platform, utilizing remote sensing and field survey datasets. High-resolution mapping and natural resource evaluation of the seabed guided by recently compiled seabed map, and delineated obvious potential areas in the offshore for further detailed exploration. As a part of modernization in GSI, he established or revived 5 advanced centers of R&D and expedited identification and declaration of several new geoheritage sites of unique earth science importance in India for protection, conservation, and development of geoparks and geotourism potential. He is a co-author of highly acclaimed book on the Thar Desert in Rajasthan, Land, Man, and Environment, which was published in 1992 by the Geological Society of India, Bangalore, and contributed to preparation of Quaternary Geology Atlas, GSI 2014, published Geomorphology and Environmental Susceptibility, published in 2005. And he is a fellow of the Geological Society of India, Bangalore, and a member and life member of several learned societies of the country. as I mentioned, that he has done a lot of work on the conservation and development of geoparks and geotourism. That seems to be very dear to him. So he will be speaking on this particular topic today before the society, and we all will be benefited with his vast experience in the country as a DGGSI. And now he is very active in the geoscience, geoheritage sites conservation groups, and looking for making a society to make this a law for our country, so that we can all save our safeguard for the and this treasure for the future generation. Now I will request Dr. Sudesh Kumar Vadhavan, please deliver his lecture. Dr. Vadhavan.
Dr. Mukund Sharma ji, I am indeed honored to be delivering this very prestigious 23rd Professor S.N. Singh Memorial Lecture. In fact, most of you are my own colleagues, and I have a lot of very senior gurus also participating in this. So I'm quite humbled with this experience. I'll be talking on geoheritage sites and potential geoparks in India. And of course, the main thrust would be on implications for geotourism and geoconservation. Right? So let me present the context. The geodiversity is the major abiotic component of lithosphere, and it supports the biodiversity, and it is supporting all the geological processes, phenomena, evolution of landscape, and it's hosting the various ecosystems on Earth. Now it's a variety of non-living elements, which includes minerals, rocks, fossils, soils, sediments, landforms, landscape evolution aspects, and geological and morphogenetic processes, and hydrological features such as rivers, lakes, and various processes which are happening on Earth, right from the glaciers to the coastal areas. So they constitute the geodiversity, which is essentially a non-renewable natural resource, and hence there is urgent need for adopting effective strategies for its conversion, for its conservation. And geoheritage is the abbreviated version of the term geological heritage. Now, naturally, it emanates from geodiversity, and those special and unique features of geodiversity, which have very distinctive characteristics, they are categorized as geoheritage sites, which are not only useful for the present generation, but which have a lot of intrinsic worth for the future generations also. And we have different criteria to categorize the geoheritage sites. I will be just explaining those important aspects of geoheritage sites. And they are the major in situ elements which is defining the various processes on Earth, like the way it is known as the geodiversity. But also they can also be studied as ex situ elements. So these are two important elements. One is in situ, studying on site of various unique heritage sites of geologic significance, and ex situ elements, which are again collections of such rare specimens and samples which are preserved in the museum. Now, these two components are very important, particularly for paleontological and mineralogical, pathological studies and other related aspects. We have a number of core libraries also developing for these particular themes. But then our in situ, on-site conservation of such geological heritage sites is very, very important. And they serve the purpose through three-pronged approach, that is conservation, education, and geotourism. These are all related aspects. But then let me say, what is the most basic characteristic is their scientific value, which is independent of their scenic or visual beauty. So any geoheritage site, which is again part of the natural heritage diversity, again part of the abiotic geodiversity aspects, it must have unique geoscientific value. it may or may not have a scenic beauty or a visual beauty, but the very fact that it is identified as geoheritage site, it must have its scientific value. Then it can also have its educational, aesthetic, and cultural value or economic value, which is again used for tourism and leisure purposes. Economic value may also include many of the geological occurrences or deposits which are used for extraction of mineral wealth and all that. But we are talking more on those aspects which are to be preserved and conserved for present as well as the future generation, because they represent the evolution of the earth as such. So therefore, there are several sites of geologic significance and landscapes which have the aesthetic value also. And each of such geoheritage sites may or may not have the tourism value. They must have representativeness, geological process or feature, meaning contribution to understanding of geological phenomena or the framework of the stratigraphy in which they are occurring, and scientific knowledge. That means we have to have a very detailed documentation of these very sites, and whether they are in the form of publication or in the form of relevant interpretations. And then they must be rare in their occurrence. They must be unique. And the best possible such sites are selected amongst the several ones. Fourth important constituent is their integrity, whether they are in a position to be preserved properly or they are already in a degraded state. So that aspect is also considered very important, because most of the natural sites are subject to several degradation threats, both natural as well as anthropogenic. And such features which have such aspects of degradation, they need to be immediately conserved for their posterity. We also know that internationally, UNESCO has created the Geological Heritage Stone Resource Group, wherein we have certain rock types which had been used historically for construction of several monuments, palaces, temples, and even many cities are actually built using those stone resources. So this was also very important IGCP project. And one Madam Gurmeet Kaur from Chandigarh University, she has been doing a human service and she has published quite a number of good papers, wherein Makrana marble, Deccan basalt, these rocks, Jaisalmer golden yellow limestone, entire Jaisalmer city is built with this particular stone, and Kerala Goa laterite, most of the buildings are constructed with laterite, and Delhi Alwar quartzite. These are very important rock types which have been utilized for, historically, they have been utilized for construction of large palaces and forts and even the normal common buildings. Now these heritage groups, they were subsequently converted into commissions. There is a international commission on geoheritage, which was actually created during the 35th IGC at Cape Town in 2016. So International Commission on Geoheritage, it came into being, and it has two sub-commissions. One is on the geoheritage sites, which is studying the in situ aspects, and other, again, it's equally important, sub-commission which is studying the collections, that is ex situ preservation in natural history museums and other museums which are happening all over the country and different parts of the world. Now, considering these aspects which are happening on a global scale, the Geological Survey of India had been the custodian of various such selected sites. In fact, as per the Charter of Functions of Geological Survey of India, it was mandated to identify and preserve and make initial sustained efforts in conservation and protection of unique geoheritage sites in the country. So as a national custodian, it had been doing this particular service. and it was in 1951 when two major geosites, that is the fossil wood occurrences near Thiruvokarai, South Arcot district, and Satanur area near Tiruchirappalli in Tamil Nadu, in southern India, they were declared as the first geological monuments in 1951, right? And thereafter, there was a spurt of declaring geological and geoheritage sites, national geological monuments, between 1974 and 1981. Over 20 geosites were declared, bringing the total to 26. This had been done in conjunction with our 125th year anniversary celebrations in 1976. Uh, BKS Vardhan was the DGGSI those days, and it was followed up by the successor DGGSI, Krishna Swamy, Krishna Swamy sir. So we had already declared 26 NGMs, and they were compiled during 50th anniversary of Geological Survey of India in 2001 by late Ravi Shankar Saab, who was the DGGSA at that time. And that publication is quite popular. It was brought out in 2001. So there were 26 NGMs that time. And again, there was dormancy and things remained silent for quite a number of years. And when I was DGGSI, I could, passionately drive it, and we could get a lot of details, and I could expand this number from 26 to 34. And there were another 6 in the pipeline. But then I had to retire, and then subsequently again there was a dormancy. And presently we have 34 geoheritage sites declared as National Geological Monuments. And during 35th IGC at Cape Town, a book was brought out by 36th IGC Secretariat. Professor Banerjee was one of the architects of that, and the then DGGSI M. Raju, so he was there, and it was brought out as 40 geotourism hotspots in India. So this small booklet also included some of selected geoheritage sites in the neighboring countries also, who were again the host for the 36th IGC, which could not take place because of this pandemic, and it is deferred. But we have this publication, which is duly endorsed by the Geological Survey of India. So that is the present day situation. And I'm just giving you the glimpse of the publications which have been brought out. Since GSI is mandated to do the conservation aspect apart from the identification and protection of these things, we, I think, need to strengthen its database and its hands. And also, I'll again speak a few more points how to strengthen this and how best other NGOs like our social media group and our societies and various other research centers can really help us in building a total big show for the entire country. So we recently have seen this publication, which is brought out by INTAC. That's a monograph on potential geoparks of India. This is a wish list and giving the details about 14 such selected areas, again worked out by various experts, including on Bhargav Saab and various other senior experts who have been very highly involved with the development of geoheritage and geoparks in the country. Now, geoparks, as we know, it has been an evolving concept, and essentially it is a unified area which is very well defined, and it advances the protection and use of geological heritage in a sustainable way. Now, it promotes economic well-being of the people who are living there. Now, these two are very important components. First thing, the area has to be very well delineated. Then it has to involve the local people so that there is a stake of these people, and the overall economic well-being of these people has to grow along with the geoconservation of these particular sites, which may have either one or more than one geoheritage sites. And also it should have linkages with the cultural and historical aspects of the area. Now that will again add to the holistic concept of protection and education and sustainable development and community involvement. Once we include the traditional knowledge base, cultural background, and historical aspects of that particular region. So that is a concept of a geopark. It is a very well-defined, multi-pronged approach, which is to be applied once we have mastered the art of developing such parks at regional level, at national level, and then at global level we can approach the UNESCO Global Geoparks Secretariat, because they have very stringent set of checklist which needs to be adhered to. And the best part is that each of such geoparks and the contained geoheritage sites must be protected by the law of the country. So we need to have legislation to protect the geoheritage sites which are contained in that. So this is the prerequisite, in fact. So therefore, our efforts have been going on, and we sure will succeed one day in getting it. But meanwhile, no one can stop us from developing regional, state level geoparks, or maybe a national level geopark. So I'll talk more about it subsequently. And the importance is also seen when the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, in 2015, they adopted a resolution that affirmed that geodiversity and geoheritage as integral parts of natural diversity and natural heritage. Now, this particular resolution put geoheritage sites and geodiversity at par with biodiversity and nature conservation. Now, this was a very important international development, wherein the geoparks movement got a solid push and recognition on international platform, and geodiversity and geoparks concept progressed properly on well-defined course. And then they could evolve the various criteria, because this geoparks concept has been evolving from the European countries, and particularly England, which is leader in the geotourism concepts. So they have listed 5 major criteria, that is size and setting. We have a well-defined limit of a particular area which is hosting geological entities, and then there has to be a management body, or there has to be a plan for local involvement. This is to be supported with bottoms-up approach based on strong political will and long-term financial support with professional management structures. Particularly, since 2015, we also have sustainable development goals of UNESCO, which are linked with this. Now, this particular aspect is perhaps one of the impediments, wherein some of the political leaders, the decision makers, they are feeling, or maybe they are fighting shy of going ahead with this, because we need to have a regular management body and a plan for local involvement. In addition to the law, if you formulate a law which is a top-down approach, there has to be a particular mechanism to implement it, or to monitor it, how best it is being implemented. So these are the, this is my personal opinion, these are the practical problems which I think we need to facilitate the decision makers so that they see the proper way how it can be done. And maybe I'll give you a couple of examples where it is being done properly in Rajasthan, maybe in Jaisalmer and Jodhpur. So I'll give you 2 examples subsequently. Then we need to have economic development plan. Now this is to take care of the sustainable development, wherein the geotourism is to be encouraged so that there is some funding flow. This is in addition to the initial long-term financial support, which has to be assured by the state government or the central government. Then these aspects are to be taken care in terms of educational development and interpretative centers, museums, popular literature, maps, guided tours, trails, modern communication media and all that. So all the whole lot of sporting mechanism has to be adopted so that the educational worth of these identified geoheritage sites and geopark, it is transmitted to the students, scholars, and public in general. And then the important aspect is protection and conservation. Now, this has to be supported by a national legislation. A legal binding has to be there so that they are adequately protected. And anyone who is indulging in vandalism or destroying these sites is liable to be punished. The way Archaeological Survey of India is having such teeth. Although on ground the implementation is it requires it desires much to be desired, but then there is a framework, there is a law, there are adequate rules to see to it that proper protection is advanced to these selected sites. Now, just to give you an idea, see the global network of geoparks, which operates in close synergy with UNESCO's World Heritage Center, Man and Biosphere, World Network of Biosphere Reserves, and other stakeholders which are active in geoheritage conservation. They have 161 UNESCO global geoparks in 44 countries now at the moment. And China is the leader, of course, because single party rule, and they have a lot of passion. In fact, since 2001, they started developing, and there were only 11 initially in 2001, and now they have developed 41 of such. Spain is, although a very small country, but it is one of the leaders in Europe. 15 such geoparks are there which are functioning. Then there are 9 each in Italy and Japan. Japan is another leader from Asia which is developing such geoparks, and 7 each in France and North Ireland, followed by 5 each in Canada, Germany, Greece. Again, Indonesia, another Asian giant, which is having 5 such geoparks, essentially more because of the active volcanoes there. And volcanoes, they attract a lot of tourists to see these dormant and active volcanoes there. And Portugal is also having 5 such geoparks, although it's a very small country compared to many other countries in Asia and all that. 4 each in South Korea, 3 each in Norway and Vietnam. Vietnam, I'm highlighting again, it's an Asian country, and it could again develop its own management and active plans to conserve certain areas and develop 4 geoparks. 2 each in Austria, Finland, Iceland, Hungary, and 1 each in many countries, including Tanzania in Africa, Malaysia, again, one of these. Iran also is having 1. And Indian geoparks network, it's needed, it's not yet developed. But now the awareness is growing. And having a legislation for protection and conservation of geosites is a prerequisite for developing a geopark. Associated with the development of geoparks is the concept of geotourism and the related aspect of geoconservation. Now, geotourism, as we understand, is knowledge-based tourism. It's a form of natural area tourism that specifically focuses on landscape and geology, right? And it should have this potential through these 4 parameters. One is it should have scenic beauty, the visual beauty of geological occurrences, the outcrops and the landforms and landscape. It should have that aesthetic appeal. Second is its interpretation potential. Those sites, they should have such geologic features which can be easily explained, or they can be easily understood by the common people. Because if there are very complicated such features which need very highly specialized knowledge to understand, then they may not be appealing to a geotourist. Accessibility is another important aspect, because people don't like to spend so much of time we normally we do for field work, and we keep walking for kilometers together to reach some good outcrops. So they should be easily accessible. The logistic infrastructure should be there, and then safety and amenities provided to the geotourists. This is related to the visiting conditions and proximity of recreational areas, maybe other recreational areas in that area. So these parameters are essential for promoting geotourism in a particular area. And once we take care of these, the geoconservation aspects, they are automatically understood, because if these things are valued, then people have their own vested interest in conserving those sites, because they are making money out of it. The service industry is growing on this. And here again, geoconservation, it deals with effective mechanisms for preservation of significant earth science features, the geoheritage sites, for purposes of education, science, and heritage value-added recreation. Right? And it is to have a coordinated approach that need to be adopted with defined roles and responsibilities of all concerned, and stakeholders and tour operators, local community engagements, and for long-term social benefits. Now again, a very elaborate plan is needed to develop. What we are seeing at the moment is very haphazard kind of growth. It is not well planned so far as geotourism is concerned. Cultural and historical tourism and ecotourism, they are getting promoted. And in fact, many of the state governments have again formulated their own ecotourism policies. They are giving a lot of tax holidays and other incentives for the destination managers, for the tour operators to take such people for different sites and all of those tourist circuits. But not much is practically done for promoting geotourism as such. So we need to work onto these aspects. And adoption of outward-looking bottom-up approach. This has been again mentioned, and I'll elaborate further. Now, geoconservation agencies in other countries, I'll just mention 5 major such geoconservation agencies. One is ProGeo in Europe, which started functioning as an NGO in 1993, and they created geoparks. And by November 2014, there were 64 geoparks in 22 countries across Europe. So that kind of networking is needed amongst various neighboring countries. And we have to collaborate with Asian group of networking countries. That is part of the Asia Pacific Geoparks Network. It's already there. China and Japan, they are the leaders. And it's often known as APGN, founded in 2007. It's a transnational partnership, and geoparks are developed across Asia and Oceania. Similarly, we have geoparks network in China, and also, of course, African geoparks network. The entire continent, African continent, they have developed this African geoparks network in 2009, and you'll be happy to know that it was founded by Africa Association of Women in Geosciences. See the kind of lead women they take in really caring for and protecting the geoheritage sites and geoparks. So that is one aspect wherein we can also promote participation of women geoscientists in the country. And again, Latin America and Caribbean countries also have established their own network in 2017. America is, North America, they are different. They have their own set. They don't participate openly. Of course, there the private sector is playing a major role. Many of the geoparks which they have declared and they are protecting and conserving, and many of them are in private sector. So they have their own set of rules and regulations there, and each state is having its own policy there. So they have a different set of democratic domains. But in India, we know the Geological Survey of India is the is perhaps the only mandated agency which is initially identifying and declaring the geoheritage sites or national geological monuments. And as I have already briefed the initial background, we have 34 officially declared such geosites. 32, I'm showing this map is for 32, is slightly old map. That they are the official recognized sites. State-wise distribution is given there. And I'll just briefly give you a rundown on these geoheritage sites which are identified by Geological Survey of India. Let's see the major categories under which they are categorized. One is the large and unique geological deposits or rare minerals and rock assemblages. There are 7 such geoheritage sites. Then geological boundaries and contexts of stratigraphic significance, only 3. Tectonic structure of regional significance, only 1, that is the Great Boundary Fault. Meteorite impact structures, now we have 3. And of course, I am adding few which are not formally recognized, but they are in the pipeline. They are to be recognized. Although only Lonar Lake is recognized as impact structure, but Ramgarh and Dhala, there are other important impact structures which will be recognized in due course. And then rare volcanic features of past geologic events of eruption. There are 5 such recognized geoheritage sites in India. And rare sedimentary structure. One is that eddy feature, which is again, it is a controversial issue because some people say it is this particular site is submerged under water because of that Kadana Dam and all that. And one which I think is very important is that meliolite, which is showing aeolite, the wind-borne structures which are preserved. So I'll just show you this field photo also. And most important and maximum number of geoheritage sites which have been identified by a geological survey are actually fossils and fossiliferous stratigraphic markers. There are 12. They are the leaders. And that is how the importance of paleontology in identifying many more of such rare sites, and also adopting several conservation measures, because these are the sites which show the evolution of life on Earth. And how best our students can learn. It has got a lot of educational value, and many of these sites have a lot of public interest. The people throng to see the fossil wood sites and the dinosaur remains and how various life forms and fossils are seen. This is also easily understood by the people. People can relate to these particular aspects. And then there are landscapes and geomorphic sculptures. So for the major rock types and the mineral assemblages, we have 7 such sites. Peninsular gneiss Lal Bagh, it's very famous, right in the middle of Bangalore city. Charnockite, again very close to center of the Chennai city. And laterite near Angadipuram in Kerala. Volcanogenic bedded barites in Mangampata. This is again part of one active quarry. And Gosan in Rajpura Dariba, Rajasthan. Kishangarh Nephilim cyanide is very famous. We students go there. It's a very rare occurrence actually near Ajmer, Kishangarh area. And Naga Hill ophiolite soot near Pungro in Nagaland. So some of these photos also I'll quickly run down. This is peninsular gneiss. This laterite of Kerala. We have bedded barites of Mangampeta. We have this Gosan at Rajpura Dariba. Again, I mentioned that many of these sites may not have that visual appeal for the common tourist, but they are very important for geology students and or educational purposes. And the next group is for the stratigraphic significance. That is, we have Eparchian unconformity in Tirumala, Bur conglomerate in Pali district, Rajasthan, which is conglomerate overlying the basement rocks, and Malani igneous suite of rocks having contact with the Jodhpur group of sedimentary rocks in Jodhpur area. Then we have the Great Boundary Fault, which is structural major tectonic event. This particular fault runs for more than 400 kilometers, and three major impact structures: the Lonar, the Dhala, and the Ramgarh in Rajasthan. Dhala in Madhya Pradesh, and Lonar, of course, in Buldhana district in Maharashtra. Now, this Great Boundary Fault, as you can see, it's a very prominent feature, which is which is making the Vindhyans abut against the Aravalli Craton. Again, Bundelkhand Craton is also there, and number of other associated faults are in there. They are seen in Google images like this, and at outcrop scale, we can see how the calcite veins are also getting affected, getting sheared by the Great Boundary Fault. Then rare sedimentary structures and of course the volcanic features. They are there. I'll just show you the. This is the eddy current feature in Lonavada group, that is in Gujarat. Again in Gujarat, these are the Aeolianites on the right. These are the Aeolian wind stratification, cross-bedded nature. So they are preserved in Mileulites, close to the Adityana, that is close to the Porbandar area and all that. So they are very important, and they are unique features in Mileulites. Then we have these columnar joints in Idupi, and again such columnar huge columns of basaltic lava you can see in Coconut Island. Then we have the pillow lavas, Maradihalli, Chitradurga. Now many of these features again are very important for their scientific worth. They may or may not be having that public appeal, but they need to be protected and preserved because they are very important sites which our young officers and even students, university students and scholars, they visit and they see how these things were happening in pre-Cambrian times. Again, pyroclastic rocks, Kolar, Karnataka. Balanis, these are the welded tuffs. There are about 52 rhyolite flows and nearly 700 million years old acid volcanism, which is preserved here in this part of northwestern India. And we are showing you the contact also. The Jodhpur sandstone is overlying the Balani igneous suit. These are the various flows, and on the inside is the Jodhpur Mehrangarh Fort, which is resting on this Malani volcanic rocks. The ignimbrites, agglomerates are there, and of course the fort building is built with the Jodhpur sandstone, which is also occurring in the vicinity. Then we have very important fossils and fossiliferous stratigraphic markers. These were the two first ones to be declared as geological monuments, Sathanur and Thiruvakkara in Tamil Nadu. They are still attracting a lot of public, and they are the ideal candidates to be developed into a geopark. With associated features are on them. Akal Fossil Wood Park is another very promising site because it's already protected as part of the Desert National Park in Jaisalmer. And on the inside you see those two ethnic style huts which are hosting a museum there. Although it's in a very bad condition, bad shape, but they need good guidance and good technical advice how to make it more vibrant and more attractive for the people there. So it is one of the important tourist destinations within Jaisalmer, just about 13 kilometers from the city center. And then we have number of stromatolite fossil parks. 4 are such parks which are identified and delineated. Now, stromatolites are very important, as Professor Banerjee, who has done very detailed research work on the stromatolites. These are important also because this particular bacteria, cyanobacteria in Archean rocks, through photosynthesis, it could create a lot of oxygen. So the atmosphere, which is now having about 20% oxygen, it reached up to 35%. And that was the peak sometime in Carboniferous, when these blue-green algae, the cyanobacteria, the stromatolites, they were thriving and they were so widespread all over the earth. And they could raise the oxygen content, and with the raise in the oxygen content and its interaction with the ultraviolet rays from the sun could create ozone layer. That protective layer could enable the oceanic life to come on land. That is how that was the transition from Cambrian onwards. And then subsequently, the various life forms they evolved on land. Initially, they were amphibious life, and subsequently, they could evolve on land. So, stromatolites are very important indicators of evolution of life on Earth. So, wherever they are, they need to be protected and preserved. We have Jhamarkotra, close to Udaipur, wherein we have a variety of such stromatolites. Similarly, in Chittorgarh, Bhujunda area, we have such stromatolites. They are protected, and fortunately, here the local administration is also taking a lot of good interest, thanks to Professor Ranawat, who has been leading in getting this particular site developed as a geotourism hotspot and getting geoconservation measures adopted by the state governments. State government has already allocated funds for development of this particular tourist circuit in Chittorgarh. Again, Namli in Sikkim, I was really very lucky in getting this particular site declared as geological monument. Again, with the very kind consent of the then secretary, the chief secretary of the state. So they could develop a small park there, and Geological Survey of India provided them the geotechnical advice and the maps and the other details. Saketi is very prominent, very important Shivalik Fossil Park close to Chandigarh, and this has been one of the major landmarks for contribution of the paleontologists. Particularly, we know Dr. V.P. Mishra ji. He was instrumental in developing a catalog of various such Shivalik fossils, and number of life-size models could be created. The fiberglass models could be created in that area, and it's also a major tourist attraction there in these areas. And recently, Dr. O.N. Bhargav has advanced a few other sites in the vicinity and suggested to develop a geopark. I'll come to that subsequently. Then geomorphic landscapes. We have such sculptures which are again different types of taphonies in Sandra granite in Rajasthan. So we have number of such features which are developed because of the erosion of such rock types with the winds and the action of water. So eagle spreading wings and the oval head shape and such features are very common. It's very pleasing to look at. So very typical granitic terrain, towers and boulders and such features. Varkala Cliff, again in Kerala, this is a very unique feature facing the Arabian Sea. This is the only cliff which is facing the Arabian Sea and showing the Mioclasine rock types capped by the laterites. It's a beautiful beach also. So a lot of tourists are already visiting here, and that is one reason it's getting degraded, because the drainage system on the surface is not properly managed, and it is leading to the collapse of this cliff front. So now, of course, the state government is taking measures to protect it. Then to have a proper appreciation for these sites, we really need to have a very detailed documentation. It's very important initial step, and there are standardized templates under which these details are to be filled up, and we have to follow these because they are developed by the international authorities. International good practices are also there. Therefore, every geosite, every geoheritage site needs to be detailed in this fashion, and then it has to be clearly stated whether it has got tourism value also or not. Because many of these sites will have only their scientific worth, and they need to be protected because of that also. So we need to categorize these various geoheritage sites accordingly. And we have already seen several state level parks, which we can call geoparks, but then they are parks as such, and they are doing very good promotion on geotourism. For example, Dinosaurs Fossil Park at Rayoli, in Balasinor, Kheda. Gujarat government is taking lead now, and with the help of GSA officers and other experts on dinosaurs, they have developed a very good museum also at the site. And a good building has come up, and other civic amenities are also coming up there. Arwa Lumshaina cave, that is in Meghalaya. This is very important, and I know Birbal Sani Institute is doing a lot of research on the isotopic studies and dating of that middle Holocene type, that is 4,800-year-old stalagmite deposit there, and they have, I think, preserved some of that section also in their museum. So that is the ex-situ development of the protection of the site. There Amkhoi Fossil Park near Ilam Bazar, Birbhum, and Gangoni Grand Canyon in West Bengal. These are the already popular tourist sites which are adopted by the state government. Urvakal Rock Garden and Belam Caves in Kurnool, Bora Caves and Gandhikota Gorge in Penna River, Andhra Pradesh. Similarly, in Andamans, we have Natural Coral Bridge. And Narmada River Gorge, again through Marble Rocks, that is Beda Ghat, is a very important tourist destination. And again, Narmada dinosaur fossils and petrified egg nests and fossilized wood park at Mandu, Bagh Lameta, Dhar. This is in MP. This is also coming up, and local administration is also showing a lot of interest. And then Balancing Rock in Hampi and Yana Rocks near Yana village in Karnataka. And some of the potential geoparks, again, they are not delineated in details, but we have a number of features contained in these particular sites, which can become very good candidates for opening up of our chapters on geoparks. See, Aravali Geopark, that is Udaipur Zawar, which is a lead zinc mines and oldest metallurgical site. It has been recognized by the American Association also, that the metallurgical techniques that we Indians had is the oldest, 8,000 years BC. And that is how Maharana Pratap and this particular region in Udaipur, they could sustain their fights against Mughals. And that is how they were being attacked, because of this mineral wealth that they had. Similarly, Thar Desert Geopark, again, Jaisalmer is one major site and Jodhpur is another site. So together these two can become Thar Desert Geopark, or maybe independently also they can be developed into geoparks. Jaisalmer Geopark, many of these sites, geoheritage sites, are protected very well within the government declared protected site of Desert National Park. It has got its own set of advantages and disadvantages. Whereas in Jodhpur, the two important geoheritage sites are protected by a private trust, Menangarh Fort Trust, which is the property of the Maharaja there. So these two examples are there. And of course, this privately managed trust is doing a very good job. They have developed a few other sites. They have brought in the biodiversity aspects also in their walking trails, guided trails. That way they are protecting the sites online. But then it is purely in the private agency, and they have levied initial entry fees, and they are protecting it. They are doing a very good conservation job. Similarly, we can develop Jaipur uplands and desert margin circuit, because Jaipur has become a World Heritage City also. There are other such potential sites in Himalaya. We have Pin Valley and Spiti Valley areas. Dr. and Bhargav and others, they have elaborated on the various aspects of the landscapes and the Triassic catastrophic mass extinction and other fossil assemblages which are happening there. And then, of course, the Buddhist monasteries and archaeological and historical cultural distinctiveness is also there in Himachal. Other is the Eastern Ghats and coastal environment, that is Konark Sun Temple, and we have these Kondalites and Quaternary Paleostrand lines and all that. This is another unique tract wherein we can have good exposures on Gondwana land also getting exposed. The East Coast bauxite is also there, which brought in the Industrial Revolution in India. Right? This is in Odisha. And Vishakhapatnam, Iramati Dibalu, Kondalite Geopark. This has been again explained in details by Rajsekhar Reddy, my friend and colleague, Dr. Rajsekhar Reddy, who retired from Andhra University. So a number of very good features, coastal features are also seen along with
Thank you all for your
patient
hearing.
historical Buddhist circles and various Hindu temples.
INSA
This area. Brainstorming session
And
on
Deccan
6th
Traps,
wherein we discussed the draft bill.
large igneous
And
province,
Professor Banerjee seen there,
Ahmednagar,
the leader in this.
old landscapes,
and Rasik Ravindra Saab
the
and number of other
Lonar
experts
crater
we
is
have come
also
together to discuss on
can be
various
brought in the circuit,
issues
to
and
archaeological
aspects of the
sites,
draft bill, which is again
and
pending with the
volcanic
ministry.
tubes
We are
through which
pursuing
the
it.
lava
Thank you
had
once
flowed
again
out during
for giving me this opportunity.
Cretaceous
Volcanism. So these are the important sites, and Kutch is open textbook category kind of park, wherein Cenozoic rocks are very well exposed. All very good contacts are seen, and Biswas Saab from ONGC, he had developed a very detailed initial work, and now with the association of the Bhuj University, Dr. Thakkar and his team, they are there. So they have identified 9 such geological stations, which are the epicenters around which various geotourism trails can be developed. But personally, I feel this Dholavira archaeological site, geoarchaeological site, which is equivalent to Harappan settlement, and surrounding areas in Rapad and all that, they are the ideal sites along with the Bhuj, visit to the various places around Bhuj. So maybe a couple of such selected, well-defined terrains can be taken out and promoted as geoparks. They are ready. In fact, these people, these areas are already drawing a lot of tourists to visit them. In addition to the typical Sabka environment in Rann of Kutch, Andamans and Nicobar Islands are again another unique environment, and a lot of good sites of ophelites and other coastal areas. And of course, we can also showcase some of the geological hazards like effects of tsunamis and active volcano, mud island and all that. These can be shown to the public. Varkala Cliff, again, south of areas in Kerala and Thiruvananthapuram, Trivandrum area. These can be combined into a good geotourist circuit, and a potential geopark can happen there. Ramgarh Impact Crater, a lot of good work is being done by Professor Ranawat, and we have brought out very good brochures and publications on this. A lot of international persons have also worked and brought a lot of new additional data on geology of this particular impact structure. Kurnool Geopark, Rajamundri Geopark in Andhra Pradesh, where Intertrapian is showing a lot of fossils, and these are the sites which are exposed in a particular quarry, and they need to be protected immediately, else the quarry will be flooded or it will be reclaimed by filling up and all that. And then Roar Bengal Geopark, West Bengal. My dear friend Satyabrat Guha, he has also given very elaborate details on this recently compiled book by Rajsekhar Reddy. So these, and then of course Bhimbetka in MP, wherein we have this rock art in Hidayakaran impressions, and Maharashtra Yavatmal columnar basalt, and Ladakh. Ladakh itself is a very unique environment, dryland environment of high altitude, the cold desert. So there are many potential sites which need to be protected. And Renukaji Nahan Saketi, this has been promoted by Dr. Owen Bhargav Saab and his team. And I'm very happy that we could renovate this Shivalik Fossil Park, which was established in 1974. And we could shift to the new building and renovated museum in May 2014. This is also a very interesting geotourist destination. And of course, with associated sites, can be developed into a good tourist circuit and a geopark. And I know Dr. G.S. Tiwari, who's DDG in Chandigarh, is supervising further improvements and he's adding a lot of great values to this particular site. Now, we have already seen that how various ex situ conservation aspects are gaining importance. That is, the museums and the exhibitions of this geologic material, and bringing out such coffee table books and publishing postal stamps and good literature. Apart from the social media and filming of these sites, it is there to create more awareness amongst people, which will encourage bottom-up approach. Demand from the public, so that the policy makers and decision makers, they can be more malleable to listen to these requests. Again, there are many universities which are taking a very good lead in developing natural history museum. Chandigarh is another good example, wherein I think Dr. Sani has taken a lead, and a number of local people and teachers, the faculty there, they have taken a lead. In Delhi University also, I know Dr. Prasad, Professor Prasad has developed a small museum within the department. Jammu University is having a Wadia Museum of Geology. Now, these are very good initiatives and very good museum. But my personal feeling is that there should be some mechanism to make them more popular and make them open to public viewing it also. There should be some way wherein maybe once a week it should be open to public visiting it. We have to facilitate this kind of thing so that they are made accessible. Otherwise, they are just kept mostly under lock and key. Similarly, I know there is a very good museum in Birbal Sahni Institute itself. So these are the some of the ways wherein we can promote the awareness and publicity for this geodiversity and geoheritage ex situ conservation. There are many private owners, who are also for example, in Canada, Alberta, this gentleman has got his own private collection, and this is now displayed as Royal Tyrrell Museum. So there are many such stalwarts, many private owners. We have also in India, Dr. Makki is there in Nasik. So a lot of private museums are also coming up. There are a few others I know. They are promoting their own personal collection. They are putting together and attracting a lot of good visitors there. So this movement, I think, needs to be promoted in India also, so that there is awareness and there is also some dimension of geoconservation. Another important aspect I want to mention here, because I'm addressing many paleontologists of international repute here. Paleontological heritage and geoethics, this has become very important topic. It's a new concept, and recently there have been a couple of publications on this. And the term is coined as paleontoethics. Now, this is important because fossils are amongst the most threatened elements of geodiversity. And vandalism of fossils sites or trade in fossils, it's a growing concern the world over actually. And adopting guidelines for geoconservation is a must, particularly for fossils. And therefore, the legal framework and statutory protection measures, they have to be put in place to provide some guidelines and some control on the issues concerned. Finally, to conclude and to again summarize some ways forward, I would say that geoheritage conservation hinges on enhanced awareness about lasting values of geodiversity and adopting mechanisms for amicable resolution of the conflict of interest and to strike balances through a variety of human interventions. For convincing the policy and decision makers in thriving democracies, it is best to arrange a visit to functional geopark for first-hand experience and accrued benefits to the local society. Now, this was the aspect which was also highlighted by host Brilla, who delivered a talk recently in July to our WhatsApp group. Dr. Satish Tripathi could organize that. So we need to really promote this kind of interest in public. And then Geological Survey of India, which is the dedicated division, having a dedicated division, a curatorial division, we need to recommend to DGGSI. I'll also talk to him personally. I hope he's attending it, Mr. Kharkal, that we need to have such dedicated curatorial divisions in regions also, not merely at CHQ, but each region should have this, so that more dedicated, passionate officers with experience can be posted to advocate and advance the protection of our geological monuments and geoheritage sites and select more geoheritage sites. Then we need to also develop updated geodiversity inventory. Unless we have a regular institutional support for such inventories, we will not be able to claim that they are the national heritage. In fact, we will be just developing the wish list only, unless it is fortified by the institution. So GSI and the state DGMs and eminent university departments and research organizations, they should come together and take institutional lead with the assistance of NGOs and stakeholders in updating the inventory, geodiversity inventory. And then bottoms up approach. And some of the mining agencies can also be roped in because these PSUs can adopt some of these sites initially for long-term funding and conservation. So with this, I would thank you once and all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Vadhavan, for the very nice, elaborate, and very informative presentation on the geoheritage sites as well as the concepts and potential geoparks, everything. Dr. Mukund Sharma, can we take a few queries if we have time?
Yeah, there are only two questions. I
Okay.
think Dr. Sanjay Kumar has raised the hand. I think he would like. Dr. Sanjay Kumar, please. No, he raised his hand, but
Oh,
no
he
more
writes
question.
he writes a compliment, excellent presentation.
Yeah. So we are grateful to Dr. Vadhavan for his excellent presentation, and I think he has sensitized the many agencies in the country, the people at large, and all those experts who are working in the field of geology to conserve how to conserve this geological heritage. It is very much important for all of us to preserve this thing, because nowadays lots of developmental activities are going on which are hampering and harming the geological heritage. So until unless this is our duty, we tell the developmental agencies to protect particular site and particular feature which is available in that locality and in this area and that area, they are unaware of the importance of those things. So we have to inventorize all such features which are available in different states, cities, and in country at large. Then only we can save these things. And there are the two groups. One is being spearheaded by Dr. Tripathi. We are taking up this call with the ministry, and I think those like Dr. Vadhavan, they all are the very senior persons, and they have been working with the governmental agency. They know how to apprise the concerned person to take this thing very seriously, and as early as possible we must try to impress upon the government to promulgate legislation to conserve our geological heritage in the country. So we are hopeful that in the days to come, we will take up this matter and we will be successful in getting the new legislation as on the lines of the Archaeological Survey of India in the country. So thank you. And if anybody else want to say something, I think Dr. Banerjee is looking for something to say. Dr. Banerjee. Yeah, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, my compliment to Suresh and very nicely presented the whole story of geoheritage.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So I would now request Dr. Sudhir Shukla to please propose a vote of thanks, because in this tough time, we are able to receive a good response from all over the fellows and the members from the Geological Fraternity from all over the country. At one point of time, we were 76 persons who were listening to Dr. Sudhir Kumar Vadhavan. This is a very good number. We all are concerned about the geoheritage. So now I request Dr. Sudhir Shukla to please propose a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma. On behalf of the Paleontological Society of India and all of us, and on my personal behalf, we are very much thankful. We are rather grateful to Dr. Vadhavan for his very informative and very elaborate lecture, which he has delivered, and he has given a wealth of information to all of us and shown the way how to proceed in the matters of geopark and geoheritage. So we are especially thankful for him to have accepted the this invitation for the Professor S.N. Singh Memorial Lecture and agreeing to deliver this lecture, taking out time from his very busy schedule. We are also thankful to all the dignitaries present, seniors present, Professor Dheeraj Mohan Banerjee, Dr. Rasik Ravindra, and many others. I am seeing a couple of people here. Dr. Mishra has also joined. Vijay Mishra is also, I'm seeing him. And all those dignitaries, professors, head of departments, Professor Ajay Mishra from the LU, Lucknow University, and the EC members of the PSI, as well as the organizers, everybody, to have really, as Mukund said, that in the last 24 hours, we are having difficult times in Lucknow, but at least this could have happened, obviously virtually. So I'm very, very much thankful to all the fellows and researchers and the students also who have joined this thing and have definitely been benefited by the deliberations of Dr. Vadhavan. Lastly, I would thank Dr. Vadhavan for his lecture, and we look forward for his guidance in future to the PSI. Thank you very much.